Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just gonna get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so, just down below. If you like the content you see, don't forget to give a like. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's a comment section down there as well for all of that. Today we are diving back into the Ghostly Echoes series. We had been working our way through British Columbia, so now we are going east. We're skipping over Alberta because we already did that one, and we are diving into the ghost stories of Saskatchewan. So I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. This story takes place in Fort Walsh, Saskatchewan. Inspector Denny's strange case. Inspector Cecil Edward Denny was one of the original officers of the Northwest Mounted Police. He was stationed at Fort Walsh in the 1870s, a time when the Canadian West was very young and very wild. Denny was adept at handling volatile situations and dangerous people, and collected a wealth of exciting personal stories which he eventually, in retirement, parlayed into a writing career. The strangest of all his experiences demanded an entire book to itself entitled Riders of the Plains. In it, Denny described an inexplicable event that took place in 1875. Denny had decided one day to go on a hunting and fishing expedition. An experienced frontiersman, he loaded every necessity for the trip into a pack horse. His plan was to travel overland to his destination, accompanied by a native guide. On the return trip, the guide would take the horse and supplies back along the same route, while Denny used a raft and enjoyed a scenic and exciting river voyage. During his return by raft, the inspector was overtaken by the wildest of rainstorms. Though it was the middle of a summer afternoon, the sky grew as black as night. Blinding sheets of rain poured down. Furious winds and violently churning water whipped the raft uncontrollably, and thunder and lightning split the heavens. Denny knew that in order to survive the storm, he would have to sit it out. He beached his raft and found what little shelter he could. There was a brief lull in the storm during which Denny heard the nearby pounding of drums and familiar rhythmic native chanting. He was extremely relieved. Surely the natives would offer him some food and shelter, and help him dry his soaked clothing. Denny followed the sound to its source, a small encampment in a nearby clearing. When the officer was close enough to identify the artistic designs that decorated the teepees, he grew even more pleased. It was a Cree camp that he was approaching. Good news, since the Crees were helpful friends of the Northwest Mounted Police. However, as Denny staggered toward the clearing through the final few hundred yards of heavy rain-soaked bush, he began to notice something strange. The natives moved easily about the camp, seemingly oblivious to the storm. Naked children played together happily, and women sat at the open doors of their tents preparing food. The men wandered about the camp, inappropriately dressed against the torrential rain and seeming not to care. There were even a few shaggy horses grazing as contentedly as if it was a warm and sunny day. The scene was unsettling, but Inspector Denny was longing for some food and the comfort of one of the tents. When the rain beat down upon him even harder, he decided to make a run for the camp. The moment he left the tree line and entered the clearing, however, the man found himself wrapped in a cocoon of flickering blue electricity. The mysterious force hurled him to the ground and knocked him unconscious. When he eventually regained his senses, he was unable to move. Denny was forced to spend a long period lying helplessly on the ground while the tempest raged mercilessly over him. After some time, the inspector was able to struggle unsteadily to his feet. He took a few slow, painful steps in the direction of the camp and then stopped. He was stunned by the realization that there was no longer a camp. Every tent, every animal, every man, woman, and child had vanished. There were no voices to be heard, and no reassuring rhythm of drums. It had all disappeared. At first, Denny suspected that he had been unconscious much longer than he had originally thought. The only explanation could be that the natives had struck camp and moved on. As Denny entered the campsite and examined the ground, however, he reconsidered. There were no ashes left from the fires, no dung or hoof prints from the horses, and no sign whatsoever that the area had recently been populated by a substantial number of people. The clearing appeared undisturbed by anything other than the extreme elements. As the storm continued to rage, the inspector knew that he had to take action. Continuing on to the fort by raft was now impossible, and there was nothing to sustain him where he was. Denny decided that moving on was the best plan and set out to cover the remaining 15 miles to Fort Walsh on foot. He arrived near midnight, shivering, starving, exhausted, and utterly confused by the strange experience that he had had. The other officers of the fort laughed when they heard the story and insisted that Denny's imagination had gotten the better of him. The more he analyzed the situation, however, the more convinced he became that there was no rational explanation. Later he returned upriver with 2 pack horses and a native guide. The official reason was that Denny needed to retrieve his abandoned supplies. While this was true, he was more eager to re-examine the Cree campsite. He found the place easily despite its different appearance in the calm weather and warm sunshine. There were a few trees split by lightning, evidence of the previous day's tempestuous weather, but the site seemed otherwise undisturbed. As Inspector Denny surveyed the clearing, he noticed a few fascinating things. There were a number of stone rings overgrown by grass, suggesting that a camp had existed there long ago. More interesting and disturbing was the discovery of several bleached human bones. There were 2 skulls along the remains the officer had found, one of them so small that it had to have belonged to a child. When Denny mentioned these facts to his guide, the native man did not seem surprised. 2 generations before, the guide said a band of Crees had been slaughtered upon the very spot by their traditional enemies, the Blackfoot. Every man, woman, and child had been killed. The camp had been burned to ground and the horses stolen. It was a well-known story among the native people, said the guide. He had heard it since he was a young boy. During the violent electrical storm, did Inspector Denny actually witness a scene from the past? There have been great significant minds who thought such a concept possible. Thomas Edison, in his later years, became intrigued with the idea of creating a radio that was significantly sensitive to pick up sounds from the past. Basing his theory upon the idea that energy, like matter, was indestructible, Edison believed that the vibrations of every sound ever heard continued to exist. They were simply no longer audible to the average human ear. Inspector Denny never offered a theory to explain his strange experience, but he had heard Edison's. He might very well have been convinced. This story takes place in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Vera's stories. Although it seems that nearly everyone encounters the supernatural at some point in his lifetime, certain people appear to be more sensitive than others. Those individuals are either consciously aware of or somehow attract more than their share of first-hand paranormal experiences. A woman from Prince Albert named Vera is undoubtedly one of these special people. Throughout her life, she has felt particularly sensitive to certain strange phenomena and has shared some uncanny moments of communication with her loved ones. Vera has a niece with whom she is especially close. When the girl was an infant, she was very ill and had to be rushed to Saskatchewan for emergency surgery. In her home, more than 100 miles away, Vera could clearly hear the baby's distressed crying. Later, she learned that the crying she had heard happened at the exact time when her tiny niece had been left screaming and alone in an examining room. Another instance came about following the passing of Vera's mother. The elderly woman had been blind and disabled and relied on the telephone to keep track of her family. Vera was accustomed to receiving a call from her mum every day at 5:25 p.m. Mysteriously, the woman's death did not interrupt this routine. For a long time after the funeral, Vera's telephone would still ring at precisely 5:25 p.m. If she tried to answer it, there would be no one there, but Vera always knew that the caller was her mother. One of Vera's most profound supernatural experiences resulted from her brief encounter with a woman whose name she did not even know. It happened during a time that was particularly stressful for Vera. Among the many worries she had were her mother's deteriorating health and the conditions of the extended care facility in which she had been placed. My mother was in a home for 6 years before she died. It was not a home that anyone would want to be in. It could be very abusive, Vera recalled. In an effort to improve her mother's situation, Vera spent countless hours with her, and on most nights she would stay very late to make certain that her mom was comfortably asleep. On one such evening, as Vera tiptoed quietly out past the centrally located nursing station, she felt inexplicably drawn to a certain corridor. I had just passed this area when bang! Something stopped me. I was drawn to this other wing, just pulled to this other wing. So I thought, well, why am I here? Everything was very dark and quiet and still, just like a morgue. Then I heard this crying, just like a child. So I went to this dimly lit room where a woman was lying on her back. She'd had a stroke. She couldn't move. On the wall were pictures of Christ. She was a very Christian lady, but she was crying. I just felt such compassion. So I went into her room and over to her bed, and I said, "Are you all right? All right. Can I get you something for you?" Of course she couldn't answer, so I said, "I think you're just lonesome." So I held her hand, and I said, "You know you're never alone when the Lord is with you." And I sang a couple of hymns, and I said a couple of prayers with her. Then she calmed right down, and I could tell in her eyes that she was happy I was there. So I talked to her for quite a while, and then I said, "Now I must go, but I'll come back to see you." And I left. She seemed comfortable and quiet, so I left. And the next morning, when I went to the home, I found out that she had died. That was in the summer. In the fall of the same year, I was still under a lot of stress and very tired because I was doing a lot of cooking and canning. So one morning, I slept in a bit and I had this dream. It was so vivid. I could never forget it. In the dream, I was in my kitchen looking out the window when I saw something flying at about a 45-degree angle off the horizon. And I'm a fanatic about airplanes, helicopters, and that sort of thing, so I was watching it very closely. And I saw it coming closer and closer and closer, until finally it was just outside my kitchen window. Then I could see that it was a chariot of old with 3 people in it, and Jesus was driving. When I realized this, I was just so excited. The chariot sat just above the ground. It didn't touch the ground. I was just overcome. I was so happy I couldn't speak. And when I went out to greet them, they didn't speak to me either. So I was just looking at this vision. When they all got out and stood on the lawn, this one woman with gray hair and a white cloak came over and hugged me. Just a fond hug. Then they all got into the chariot and they left, just like that. Vera felt very uplifted by the dream, but was mystified about it for quite some time. Then several weeks later, she happened to mention it to a friend who had done some extensive work in dream studies. The man listened to the details of the dream and connected it to the woman that Vera had comforted in the nursing home. "That's who came to thank you," he said. The realization was absolutely energizing for Vera. "I was so overwhelmed that year," she said. "I just had so much to do, and that dream was like an incentive. kind of a pat on the back, if you will. I had been sort of depressed and tired, and it did really brighten my spirits. For months, all I could do was think of that, and I was roaring to go again. The vision offered proof of how therapeutic it is to know that one is appreciated. It might even have offered proof of communication from the other side. For Vera, however, it was simply a beautiful and vivid experience that she would never forget. This story takes place near Carrot River, Saskatchewan. Joker's Wild. A woman named Janet, who lives on an acreage near Carrot River, has long believed her house to be haunted. It's never been a scary sort of thing, she said. Our ghost is like a prankster. He likes to flash the lights on and off and turn off the television during the last scene of our favorite show, and hide things, stuff like that. It's never so much that you get annoyed. He's just a friendly spirit, I think, looking for attention. The kids even gave him a name. They call him Chester. Chester's benign antics have kept the family amused for a number of years, and only once has he ever strayed from his usual routine. Janet remembers the incident well. It was a weekday morning, and she was preparing to visit a friend. It was kind of important, Janet recalled. My friend had a doctor's appointment, and she couldn't drive herself, so I offered to play chauffeur. And about half an hour before I had to leave, Chester started to act up in a way he never had before. The phantom pranks began when Janet went to the bathroom to brush her teeth. Her toothbrush, which was always set in a glass in the bathroom cabinet, was missing. Janet searched the other shelves of the cabinet, thinking that another member of the family may have accidentally borrowed it, but couldn't find nothing. When a few minutes had passed, she decided that she would have to borrow her husband's toothbrush and buy a couple of replacements while she was out. The mystery was not solved, but the problem was, until Janet realized that there was no toothpaste to be found. In frustration, she brushed her teeth with plain cold water and popped a breath mint in her mouth. Janet had only a few minutes left before she had to be on the road, but was not overly concerned. All she had to do was dress, grab her purse and her car keys, let the cat out of the house, and she'd be on her way. It couldn't possibly take more than a few minutes. Seconds later, as she reached for the carefully folded outfit that she had left on the foot of the bed, she changed her mind. The clothing had been fine an hour earlier. Now it was damp, to the extent that it had even a small moist patch on the duvet cover. Nothing had been irreparably damaged, but Janet had to find another outfit, which put her several minutes behind schedule. The practical jokes all bore Chester's trademark playfulness, but Janet's usual patience was wearing paper thin. At that point, I had to be out of the house in about 30 seconds, or else I was going to be late, she said. Chester was normally a one-gag kind of ghost. He'd do some little thing, and then you wouldn't hear from him for days. It was extremely frustrating that he'd chosen this particular morning to put on a whole show. Frustrating or not, the show was far from over. As Janet quickly dressed in a second outfit, she found all the pairs of neatly rolled socks in her bureau had been mixed up. There was not one matching pair to be found. Gathering her purse and keys required a 5-minute search. Janet eventually found both stuffed behind an oversized throw cushion on her living room sofa, and the cat, who was normally obedient for a cat, refused to be let outside. The animal crouched stubbornly in the furthest dusty corner under Janet's son's bed and hissed every time it was spoken to. With one last desperate look at the clock, Janet decided that it was time to give up. I figured if the cat peed on the rug, so be it. I ran out the door and jumped in the car. As Janet jabbed the key into the ignition, she was calculating that if she did just a little speeding en route, she would not be too late picking up her friend. That probably would have been the case, except that the car would not start. I got nothing, Janet later explained. No grinding, no dead battery sound, nothing. That's when she realized she would have to abandon her whole mission. It was very embarrassing, but I went in, called my friend, and told her that I couldn't make it. It was too late for her to get another ride, so she had to cancel her appointment. I felt really bad about the whole thing and really angry at Chester, but I didn't say anything. An hour later, Janet noticed that as soon as she had placed the phone call to her friend, Chester's pranks had stopped. She went about her regular routine without incident. Out of curiosity, she went to the bathroom and peeked into the cabinet. Her toothbrush and toothpaste sat in their usual places. She then took her car keys off the hook on the wall and went out to the driveway. She opened the door of her blue Taurus and put the key in the ignition. It started on the first turn, Janet said. Not a thing wrong with it. In the days that followed, Janet spent a great deal of time considering her strange morning with Chester. In the end, she decided that there had been some important reason the ghost had not wanted her to go. I'll never know for sure, but maybe I would have had an accident on the highway, she speculated. There was definitely something different about that day. Following his mysterious flurry of activity, Chester went back to his usual tricks. Janet's attitude toward the spirit had changed, however. She would later sum it up by saying, "I just appreciated Chester more. Nowadays, I think I'm very lucky to have a ghost who plays harmless little jokes and looks out for me. When it comes to hauntings, you can't ask for better than that." This story takes place in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Ghostly knock on Ginger. Julie remembers the first day she moved into her small, older home in Prince Albert. I was unpacking boxes, trying to get things put away, and there was this pounding on the door. The young woman ran from the back bedroom to see who it was, hoping it might be some friends arriving to offer a bit of help. When she threw open the door, however, there was no one to be seen. I figured it was kids, she recalled, and just got back to work. A half hour later, the same loud knocking caught Julie in the midst of setting up her bed frame. It took her a minute or two to untangle herself from the project and make her way to the door. The banging continued nearly non-stop until Julie got to the door. But when she opened it, once again, she found nobody standing there. Thinking that the pranksters could have run far, she searched the bushes in the front yard and peered over the neighbors' fences. She found nothing, heard no telltale giggling, and had hours of work ahead of her. So Julie quickly gave up her search and walked back into the house. The instant she closed the door, the pounding began. I was standing right there, so I yanked it open, ready to say, "Gotcha," but there was no one on the step. That's when I got a little chill, but I just said, "Okay, whoever you are, knock it off. I have a lot to do today." And that was it for quite a while. Julie's door-knocking ghost still visits on a fairly regular basis, but she has found a way to get around the nuisance of it. I had a doorbell installed, and I put up a sign that says, "Ring the bell if you're serious." That way, if I'm busy and the ghost knocks on the door, I can comfortably ignore it. It's been a simple solution to a spectral problem in Prince Albert. This story takes place in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. A spirit on the stairs. A man named Paul bought an older home in Weyburn in 1987. He knew he was getting a 2-story Victorian-style fixer-upper with a great deal of character and potential. He did not know that he was also getting a ghost. I suppose I should have figured it out earlier than I did, but you never expect something like that, Paul explained. I expected old wiring, so when the lights would flash on and off, I'd attribute it to that. I expected that the house would have creaks and groans in the structure, so I didn't worry too much about the weird noises I heard. Paul also expected that restoring the home to its former charm would take a lot of time and effort, so he ignored the various strange incidents that took place and got down to work. Every evening and most weekends, Paul spent his time stripping gaudy wallpaper and mildewy carpets and repairing crumbling plaster and decaying woodwork. It was hard work, but mainly cosmetic, until he decided to make one major change. There was a narrow little staircase in the back of the house that led from the kitchen to the upstairs hall. Someone had walled it over years before and had decided to open it up again. When Paul put his sledgehammer through the wall at the bottom of the staircase, he released decades of musty air, cobwebs, and something inexplicable. That night, as he lay in bed, he finally heard a noise that could not be dismissed as the creaking timbers of an old home. It was the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps ascending the newly opened rear staircase. It was so real I thought someone had broken into the house, Paul recalled. Quickly and quietly he jumped out of bed and looked for the heaviest weapon he could find. The best he could produce was a metal 3-hole punch that had been sitting on the desk in his bedroom. Armed with his deadly office implement, Paul stood by the door ready to strike. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I was sweating, I can tell you. I stood there for I don't know how long, waiting for this guy to take a few more steps down the hall, or go back down the stairs. But there was nothing. It was just absolutely quiet. After a while, Paul began to feel foolish, waiting for the attack that would not come. He dared to open the bedroom door a crack and peered down the hallway. He could see nothing. He ventured out into the hallway and walked to the top of the rear staircase. Nothing. Paul decided that a thorough check of the house could wait until morning and return to bed. But I didn't sleep much, he admitted. The next morning, nothing in the house was amiss. Even stranger, the only footprints disturbing the years of dust on the rear staircase appeared to be Paul's own. He knew what he had heard the night before, however, and didn't question his senses. That morning, for the first time, Paul began to reassess many of the odd little occurrences that had taken place in the house. I started to think that maybe I didn't misplace things as often as I thought I did. And maybe the old wiring wasn't to blame every time the lights went on or off by themselves. It was very strange, but I thought I had a ghost. If that was the case, the spirit was at least easy to get along with. Nothing it did was ever frightening or threatening. The footsteps on the stairs had only been so unsettling because Paul hadn't expected to hear them on that first night. Afterward, however, he took them in stride. I'd just think, okay, that's my buddy walking upstairs again. There was really nothing scary about it. I'd roll over and go to sleep. As Paul's renovation neared completion, the ghostly activity became less and less prevalent. The week that the staircase was first opened up, Paul heard phantom footsteps on 4 separate occasions. By the time he had refinished the area, the phenomenon was happening no more than once every 10 days or so. While he restored the damaged hardwood floors and put fresh paint on the walls, he was constantly frustrated by misplaced tools and brushes. As he did the final touch-ups, however, everything seemed to be staying in place. As for the lights that turned on and off of their own volition, well, that still happens. The wiring got completely redone right up to code, reported Paul, but the ghost still likes to play with the lights. I don't mind, it's not particularly disruptive, and all the annoying activity has stopped. Perhaps it's a sign of appreciation for all of Paul's meticulous work from a tenant of the old house who has decided to stay on indefinitely.